Welcome, guys, to session number 5 of the Carnivore Evolution podcast, a podcast dedicated to help you on your health and fitness journey. Today's guest will be Peter. Today, we are going to go through pretty much everything you need to know about diabetes and how it's diagnosed and how you can actually control it. So I want you guys to sit back, relax, and let's get started. Peter, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you on. So how have you been keeping?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
How are you keeping?
Oh yeah. So I'm doing fine. I am on the carnivore diet for 2 years now as a type 1 diabetic, and we can talk a lot about it in detail. And it did a lot of benefits for me.
Yeah.
I've been a type 1 diabetic for 16 years and tried all kinds of things. And well, maybe not all the way from vegan, but I tried high carb, medium carb, low carb. I did a sort of vegetarian diet. All these things, looked at fiber, FODMAP diet, did all kinds of things with my insulin regimen, followed the standard recommendations, tried some things on my own. Nothing worked, at least, well, some things happened. Some things worked better than others. And I think you could get numbers already that doctors would be amazed of, but only going low carb, keto, and then carnivore did the actual trick and made it possible for me to get normal, non-diabetic blood glucose values. Because when you read about it on the internet, and you read the standard recommendations, they always talk about being in range as a type 1 diabetic. But here it comes, the tricky detail is that in range for type 1 diabetics means that your blood glucose ranges between, say, 4.5 and 10 millimoles per liter. And that's not non-diabetic. In the low range it is, but they accept values up to 10. And if you have an average of like 9 or 10, that's just really bad. But the doctors will say, great job, let's continue like this, no worries. Yeah. And you'll get all kinds of complications, no doubt, later on. But that's the common narrative. And if you look on TikTok especially, on the internet, on Facebook forums as well, people are proud if they are like 80% in range. So they are 80% below this 10 millimoles per liter, and that's not the way you should go. I would almost think that they would do better 30, 40 years ago. But nowadays, you get all these high carb meals and you have this ultra fast insulin that you can use. And now even worse, you get these continuous glucose monitors. So it's possible to eat things like cake, pizza, and all those things. Enjoy life. You could say it like that. Enjoy life, eat all of those things, and use your CGM and all the modern tools, modern medicine to keep your blood glucose sort of in range. And I think if you follow that approach, you suffer the consequences 10, 20 years later, because all the people that are doing this, they are usually 20, 30 years old. Maybe they are even type 1 diabetics from birth. And they're eating like this. And the first 10, 20 years, they probably don't have too many problems. And then later on, typically when you get 30 years old, then very gradually, that's the tricky thing as well, then very gradually you start to suffer from neuropathy, joint pain, and as a type 1 diabetic or type 2 diabetic as well, your eyes, maybe also without knowing your parameters for heart disease will worsen. Then I'm of course not talking about LDL, but just on the point of inflammation. And that's just amazing. And I also didn't know about a lot of these things. I never was so bad that my average blood glucose was like 9 or 10 millimoles per liter, but still it was not optimal. I think my A1C was like in the high 5s. So that's already quite amazing on a medium or high carb diet. I managed to do that. So that's half of the story. If you take care of your insulin regimen. Even on those diets, you can do sort of a reasonable job, let's say, but it's not good enough, in my opinion. And then I gradually, after 8 years of type 1 diabetes, I gradually started to learn about these other aspects, and especially the last 3 years, I think. So yeah, that's I started off rambling a lot about all the things that I experienced, but that's what I'm focusing on now. I focus on diet and lifestyle, and of course I still carefully look at my insulin regimen. But by going low carb, and that started all with Dr. Bernstein. Dr. Bernstein advocates an approach of eating about less than 30 grams of carbohydrates a day, and then you'll be using also very little insulin. And then this combination is perfect, because as a type 1 diabetic, you make a lot of mistakes in your disease management, and that's natural. That is not to blame anybody. It's because injecting insulin on itself is already introduces a lot of inaccuracies. They can be easily off by 10 or 20% if you inject, say, 5 units of insulin, which hardly ever happens to me anyway, because that would be a big meal. But if you inject 5 units of insulin, you can be off by 10 or 20%. That could be an entire unit of insulin. And to give an idea, if I inject 1 unit of insulin outside of a meal, my blood glucose could go all the way from 6 or 7, almost towards hypo regions. And if you make that kind of mistakes on a regular basis, you'll suffer, obviously, all these things on a daily basis. So after a meal, 5 units is nothing, because if you look around on the internet and what people are eating in terms of high carb meals, then it's easily 8-9 units for a meal. And if that's even worse, if it's a pizza, for example, then the digestion is really unpredictable. You might get a glucose spike first, and you inject those 8 units of insulin for it, and then it will drop to hypo. And then, say, 3 hours later, all the other food of the pizza that was combined with the fats and the proteins, that will arrive later on. And you would need to inject again some insulin, but you didn't do that, and then you get a spike again, and you get this whole roller coaster phenomenon. And that's what actually triggered me to follow a medium and then a low carb diet, because I really hated this unpredictability. That I felt that I was doing everything right. I followed recommendations, and then I actually thought a little bit more about it myself. I looked at what happened at my blood glucose day by day, tried to learn from it. But yeah, these type of things, they are so unpredictable. You cannot adjust your regimen for these type of foods, because if you eat a pizza, well, maybe that second spike would arrive 3 hours later. But if it's a slightly different pizza, or if, I don't know, if your digestive system is simply in a different mood on today, then it might arrive 2 hours later. Or if it's difficult to digest, it might also arrive 5 hours later. So there's nothing that you can really grasp about this.
And when you were going through these issues, what kind of help were you getting back then?
Well, not so much, because as soon as you are below 6 or maybe even 6.5% for your A1C, then doctors are happy. And if you do more, if I would tell the doctor that I am following a medium carb diet, if I focused on my blood glucose and I got it even a little bit lower to 5.8 or so, well, they would be happy, but they are not really interested in how you did it, or at most they would maybe casually ask the question, and then the appointment is already finished there, because it's a typical appointment of 10 minutes or so. Maybe the diabetes nurses, they can be more helpful if you are lucky. But I have had several diabetes nurses that, from their physical appearance, I wouldn't trust immediately. So they would be overweight themselves, for example.
Wow.
And then they forward you also to a dietitian. But the dietitians I got at the hospital, they were of the standard narrative. They compare your blood vessels to the sewer pipes, and they'll just tell you like, oh, you shouldn't eat all the solid fats because those will solidify in your blood vessels and they cause heart attacks, that sort of things. And they also typically tell you, and I've seen it a lot, also with new type 1 diabetics that I am in contact now on the TikTok, they will tell you that it's necessary to eat carbs. So like all the fitness guys, they think that you need carbs for muscle building. And well, there might be, in a subtle way, there might be some truth to it, but it's not the first requirement for building muscles. It's just the protein, but those diabetes nurses will tell the same because they think since you are using this fast-acting insulin, that's sort of the idea. There are several reasons. First is that you are using fast-acting insulin, so by force you have to use carbohydrates to cover that type of insulin because you cannot do that with protein. And they are, of course, fearful of hypoglycemia because, they are sort of responsible for my direct health. And for them, it's safer to accept some hyperglycemia instead of hypoglycemia. That are the two reasons, I think.
Yeah, and I think the main thing people need to understand is that whether you're a type 1 or you're a type 2 and you are injecting insulin, we're not really talking about that because a lot of people who struggle with diabetes usually put on a lot of weight. They usually put on a lot of weight and they usually blame this, that because you're putting on weight is because you're diabetic. But they don't understand that the condition is down to chronically elevated glucose levels. And this is the main reason why so many people struggle, is because they're eating way too much carbohydrate than what the normal person should be eating. So let's say if you weigh you're like a 200-pound man, you shouldn't be taking in any more than say 20 or 30 grams a day if you are going to be taking in some carbohydrates. But the average person is taking in well over probably 8 or 100 grams of carbohydrates every single day. And if you're doing that times 7, that's an awful lot of carbohydrates. And you have to understand the damage that's doing on your body then long term.
Yeah. So did I mute my microphone? Sorry. Are you still hearing me?
No.
Okay, no, great. You said that perfectly, and I almost suspect that you've seen a video of Gary Taubes recently because he also emphasized the fact that people that seem to have forgotten the fact that diabetes is not, hypoglycemia is not a symptom of diabetes. It was introduced actually at the point that we started to use insulin as treatment. But before, when they would just treat it with a diet, and I'm talking about type 2, of course, then they would never see hypoglycemia, not at all. So I think even with only metformin, the hypoglycemia risk is already very low. So it's actually really the insulin part. And for type 1 diabetics, it's the same story. So now they follow the wrong approach. They see this hypoglycemia thing, and it's caused by insulin, but they are going to treat it by snacking. I mean, of course, you got to treat an acute hypoglycemia with some glucose, and I'll take like 1 or maybe in the very worst case 2 glucose tablets, and my insulin regimen is rock solid. Let's call it like this. So that this happens only once or twice a month, maybe, but. The standard recommendation is, I think, to eat like 20 or 30 grams of glucose in any form when you have a hypo. So you will, if you eat that in a standard situation, that would rise your blood glucose, I don't know, by 6, 7, 8 millimoles. So you'll end up in the hyperglycemia region again. And above that, they also recommend to eat some slow carbs when you have a hypo, to cover the hours after, because apparently there's some idea that there's risk of additional hypos afterwards. I've never experienced that myself, but now on this low carb diet, I actually see the hypos coming up front. So it takes some time if you have little insulin on board. It takes typically an hour or so before the hypo actually develops into, let's say, a problematic hypo. And standard recommendation is to treat the hypo already around a level of 4 millimoles. But yeah, that's still a perfectly physiologically right blood glucose levels. Even 3.5 sometimes can be fine. If you're feeling great, if you're in ketosis as well, if you get some energy from ketones. Well, I am feeling great at a level of 3.5, sometimes even slightly lower. So I start to treat it when it's at the 3.5 and trending downwards. But yeah, that's a totally different approach. And if I treat it with 1 or 2 glucose tablets, I'll be back at 4.5 or 5 or so. And yeah, you can continue your day. And I also don't like the idea of ingesting a lot of glucose when it's avoidable by adjusting your diet and your insulin regimen.
And like you mentioned, it all comes down to how you feel. So if you're in ketosis and you're feeling great, then nobody can tell you any difference. And at the end of the day, we have two main energy sources. We have ones that come from carbohydrates and we have ones that come from fats. Now, when we look at what goes on in the world, that's going on in the world at the moment, we have a massive obesity and diabetic problem at the moment. And a lot of people are blaming that on saturated fats. They're saying, okay, processed foods, saturated fat, this is the reason why you're developing diabetes. They're pushing pretty much past the carbohydrates. And they're saying, like, listen, carbohydrates are not the problem. You can still eat your carbohydrates. Your body needs to retain glucose. But they don't understand that your body produces all the glucose you need. And if these people actually did some research, you can actually get glucose from gluconeogenesis also.
Indeed, and I think if I look at what's happening now that I'm on a low carb diet, another reason why I get less of a hypo is because it seems like my gluconeogenesis has been ramped up in a way. So not in a bad sense that it will elevate my blood glucose endlessly, but say that if I start on a walk while my blood glucose is at the lower threshold, so at 4 millimoles per liter, then what I typically see nowadays is that instead of my blood glucose on this moderate walk going down, it actually goes slightly up because my body apparently is producing some glucose on itself, knowing that I'm going to, sensing that I'm moving now. And I'm quite sure that this reduces the number of hypoglycemia episodes that I experience nowadays. And the same with weight training, of course, and that's natural. If I start weight training, I actually inject extra insulin up front, like half or sometimes even 1 unit, because if I start at 4 millimoles, which I easily do, I don't fear hypoglycemia at that point, because I know that when I do this intense exercise, it can easily go up like 5-6 millimoles per liter as well. And if I wouldn't pre-bolus, then I would get those numbers that Sean Baker sometimes mentions as well. I would easily go to 10 or slightly above 10 millimoles per liter if I don't take action on that.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly physiological, I think, but something has happened in my body that actually now it's protecting me on this point. And I don't think it's a problem of cortisol or anything. These type of responses are perfectly natural. In the morning as well, if you put your feet on the ground, I also see typically that my blood glucose goes from my 4 or 5 to 6 or 7, and I'll cover it with a little bit of insulin, like would happen also in a healthy body. Your pancreas would secrete some insulin, and then half an hour later, 1 hour later in the morning, your blood glucose is perfectly in range again. And that's. I think that's you can be easily misled if you consider those things as a cortisol problem, for example, or if you see that as an unnatural response. But I think it's natural, and at the very least, it's very helpful for a type 1 diabetic to be able to avoid hypoglycemia like this. I mean, it's just amazing. If I go to bed at night, I am able to accept a value like 4 millimoles per liter, whereas a typical diabetic, especially if you are a bit fearful, then you would not go lower than a 6 or a 7. Some go to 8 or 9 before sleeping. And that's where you win the most. It's half of your day during sleep. You can lower your A1C very easily. If you're at a 5, for example, during sleep, then your A1C, I think, can hardly be below or can hardly be above 6%.
Yeah. And tell me this much now: how has carnivore changed your life?
Yeah, so I already told this aspect, right? That I went low carb, and I went also towards keto then. That's further improved my blood glucose. And in terms of blood glucose management, I was fine at that point. And I think also that's true in general. If you go to low carb, and if you are a really active person, maybe even medium carb, maybe even at 100 grams a day, you could get your blood glucose in range. But that's of course not the full story. And I'm also putting aside the whole argument about whether those carbs are healthy anyway. But if you would purely look at your blood glucose, then that's it. Go medium, low carb, Bernstein approach. Keto would even be better. And I did that by following a healthy keto diet, the one that's advocated by Dr. Berg. So lots of veggies, lots of spinach, almonds for the fats, and you guess it probably, that's all the oxalates that I was putting in my body, and that started to cause a lot of troubles.
Yeah.
Also, before going on this keto, I like to munch on peanut butter and that sort of thing, so I could easily eat half a pound of nuts. And I started to suffer from urinary tract problems. So I started dumping all of these oxalates. They did a lot of research at the hospital, echoes of my kidneys and my bladder, to discover why I was getting this cloudy urine. And at some point I also had blood in my urine after running. And then it got even worse. I think at least 3 or 4 times I even got brown urine. So that worried me a lot, because you might think it's due to some connection with your bowels or so. That's theoretically possible. But another possibility, and that was the case here, is rhabdomyolysis. I think because of all the inflammation in my body, after a medium to long run, my muscles would be partially destroyed. Some process gets started, and it starts to destroy muscle cells, and that all ends up in your bloodstream, and that's very toxic. It has to be released by your kidneys, and then you can get acute kidney failure, that sort of things, if you don't treat it. It didn't get so far for me, luckily, but it did trigger me, obviously, to investigate what was happening. And reading a book about about oxalates from Sally K. Norton, I started to realize that might be the problem. And the funny thing is actually that after doing all the research at the hospital, they didn't find anything in the echoes, but also in the urine. I don't know, they couldn't think about the fact that it might have been oxalates. So after some advanced lab tests, the only result, the answer that I got back, was something like, well, we don't know, it's some undefined matter in your urine. But all of this disappeared after following a low oxalate diet, or actually a carnivore diet in this case. So I stopped eating all the vegetables. At some point I still kept the avocados, that sort of things. And then I progressed naturally towards carnivore, and say 1 or 2 months later, in the supermarket, I just didn't buy the avocados anymore. And yeah, it was carnivore. And
Yeah,
yeah,
that,
that basically solved all the issues.
yeah, that's something I see an awful lot with people. Also, you can see this transition where they go low carbohydrate, they go on the high protein, then they start mixing then in the fiber, they start mixing in the plant based protein, and then they go down to the vegetable route. But they can still find that they're having major issues going forward. And when you ask them, okay, how's your blood sugar, how's your A1C, they'll keep on saying, okay, they're still quite high. I can't understand why. And it's not until you dig deep into the diet and you see that these plants and these vegetables are actually doing more harm. And when we ingest these foods are actually gone. These foods are actually rich in carbohydrates also. And I think a lot of people don't understand that when you look at vegetables and you look at salads, and we're told that these foods are extremely healthy, you have to dig deeper than that. You have to understand what an oxalate is, and you have to also understand that these foods are carbohydrate rich foods. They may be fiber, but they're still going to do an awful lot of damage on the stomach, and that's where you need to do more your research.
Yeah, I think indeed a nice example is also that I fell off the wagon some weeks ago. Well, I never really fall off the carnivore wagon, but sometimes I cheat a little bit with, for example, chocolate. And I overdid it a little bit a few weeks ago. And the first thing that actually happened was when at some point I ate 2 bars of, well, quite pure chocolate, not much glucose, but still. In the evening, at night, I had to sit up straight because I was feeling heart palpitation and that sort of things. It was like drinking an entire jar of coffee after you haven't done that for a month or so. So that was quite scary. I looked it up and then, well, I'm quite down-to-earth guy. So if I read that it's possible from eating chocolate, then and it doesn't happen again, I accept it. But that was the first thing that happened, and then typical thing that already happens if I eat one bar of chocolate. That the skin rash appears again. Subtle, but still, it's quite obvious actually. Since I'm not eating anything else, I'm basically still on an elimination diet. If I
And
introduce a little bit.
what does a typical day look like now, food wise?
Yeah, it's very simple, and actually I started to eat more raw meat as well. I think 50% of my diet is now raw meat, or at least the blue rare. And since I started doing that, my fat intake went up considerably. So I'm eating a lot of fat, and I'm now, well, without intention, I'm eating only one meal a day. And that consists of 600-700 grams of meat, fatty meat. And then, well, the last few weeks, my butter intake was about 2 sticks per day almost.
Wow.
So that's not my usual intake, but
Yeah,
I feel great on it.
if the average person heard you saying that, the average
Yeah.
fitness person, they saying you're gonna have a heart attack right now.
Yeah, that's also since carnivore I started to make videos online, and one of the videos that I liked making was just walking through the supermarket in front of all these unhealthy fats, all the plant-based oils and artificial milk for in your coffee and that sort of things, and just munch on an entire pack of butter.
It's crazy.
Yeah, indeed. What you say, that if you would eat just a spoonful of butter, people already think that you get a heart attack. And the same for eggs.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. No, it's just it's absolutely insane, because I was the very same. I was always worried that saturated fat is going to kill us. Too much fat intake is going to kill us. But since I've implemented this way of eating, I've just noticed that things have improved so quickly. Like I think you were mentioning like how long did it take you to come out of this? How long are you at a stage now where you've completely reversed your diabetes, or are you more in control of your diabetes at the moment?
Yeah. So now, well, with reverse, you mean, of course, 100% control, because type 1 diabetes, yeah, I have to keep injecting insulin. But I would say that I am in full control. So that's the best you can get as a type 1 diabetic.
Exactly.
My
That's
blood, it's in range 100% of the time, factually. There might be this one or these two episodes a month that you make a mistake or didn't pay attention and you go to 10 or 11 millimoles. But if I see an 11, that would surprise me really a lot, because I must do a lot of wrong things to reach 11 millimoles. So I'm in range 100% considering the non-diabetic range. So I'm below 8 millimoles per liter, basically 100% of the time.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I asked the question, because I'm well aware that type 1s can't be reversed. I know type 2 you can, but what the argument I have with people is that with type 1 you can easily control that situation easily. And this is where that, yes, your body, you can inject insulin, but you do not need to get excess glucose from the diet that you're eating. This is where it's complete nonsense. It's complete false. And this is where we're seeing now a reduction in type 2 diabetics, that they're actually coming off carbohydrates, they're dropping their insulin, they're dropping their blood glucose, and this is the reason why they're not type 2 diabetic anymore. And when we look at type 1 and type 2, they're very, very similar, because all you're trying to do pretty much is to just remove the one macronutrient that's doing the most damage, and that comes from carbohydrates.
Yeah, it's all about reducing the uncertainties as well. And sometimes they say like there are 100 to 200 uncertainty factors in diabetes. It can be already the temperature of the environment, whether it's a sunny day or not, whether you are feeling great if you're a little bit ill or not, but also how you inject the insulin, the digestibility of the food, all of these factors. And also just whether you're a bit stressful or not, that sort of things, that all plays a role.
Yeah.
So you have to reduce your base need of insulin, and you'll be fine. If I am fasting for a day, I'm not eating, and that's the perfect way for a type 1 diabetic. There's no better way to regulate your blood glucose. I mean, if I fast for two or 3 days, and people with diabetes, especially the doctors, are very afraid of it, because you end up in deep ketosis, and then they fear the ketoacidosis from that. But as long as you keep a base level of insulin in your body, then doing this type of long fast, I feel liberated from diabetes. It was like the feeling I got in the past from doing long bike rides. Because if you are on long bike rides, your machine is just running, and the amount of insulin that you inject matters less. You can eat those carbohydrates and still be in range. So that was liberating, but the really most liberating thing was learning how to fast. And then I inject, on long fast, I only have to inject 5 units of insulin on an entire day. And that's about, maybe 10% of what a lot of diabetics, of type 1 diabetics, have to inject normally.
Yeah, that goes against pretty much what we're told about type 1s as well, where they have to eat pretty much every 2 hours.
Yeah, indeed. It should be the opposite. You should reduce the number of meals. So not even talking about the contents of the meals. If you're on a medium or high carb diet and you are able to introduce intermittent fasting, that's a very big leap. You will probably lower your A1C by 1 or 2% if you're in the 6 or 7s. And that's I think that's a good thing also in terms of diabetes treatment. It's very difficult for people to go on keto or carnivore. That scares them away. But if the regular doctor would simply tell to lower your carbohydrates to even 100 a day and skip a meal here and there and don't do all this snacking. I think basically, well, I don't know, 90% of all the type 1 diabetics would be already perfectly fine in terms of blood glucose. And yeah, the nice thing, of course, is that once they learn these things, and they also learn that it's important to monitor your own glucose measurements, look at your CGM yourself, judge what foods are suitable for yourself. If they are doing that, then they will start to appreciate also the low carb aspect of keto and carnivore and all the other benefits they get from it.
And I think you brought up a good point when you mentioned the training. You mentioned that when people train, you can see those glucose levels being balanced or being more relaxed and they're dropping down. That's a good sign. But the problem is a lot of people are not doing that. The problem is a lot of people are getting obese. A lot of people are sedentary. They have this lifestyle. They've got family. They've got busy jobs. All of this kind of stuff that they're going on in their life. And and when they go to the gym and they don't have that active lifestyle, they don't realize that this is actually doing a lot more damage because they're not burning any glucose whatsoever.
Yeah, and good examples are professional athletes or people are just very active indeed. Because, or when you are young, say that you're young and active, then you can get away with eating a lot of glucose and not feeling bad. And that's all fine. And I also experienced that during the bike riding. For me, that was the first step towards, let's say, liberation of type 1 troubles. And I felt great, but as soon as you step off the bike, so on a seasonal level, if it's winter, you stop cycling, then you see the insulin resistance coming back, and you tend to stick to this high carb diet because you don't realize yet, your body and your mind don't realize yet that you should eat less because you're not moving that much. And you start to become fatter and more insulin resistant. But you also see that at a smaller scale. If I would have a coffee break during a bike ride, then within minutes, my insulin resistance, which of course varies during the day, would go up. And if I would eat something, I would get all kinds of blood glucose issues. And then you step on the bike again, and it starts to roller coaster in all directions.
Exactly, and this is how important hormones are. And I have to bring up the calories because this is the main reason why I have an issue with people when they talk about calories. Is like people like you who are diabetic that are going down, dropping their calories down extremely low, but they just cannot lose the weight. And then when they drop their food down to say 1,000 calories, you have some moron on social media saying, listen, even though you're eating 1,000 calories a day, you're not in a calorie deficit. And this is the main reason why, when it comes to insulin resistance, people need to understand this very, very quickly. That calorie deficit is going to do absolutely nothing for you. Nothing.
No, indeed, it's going to worsen everything. And just to put a contrasting example, I'm eating, I mentioned the 2 sticks of butter and then the meat. So I don't know because I don't count the calories, but I imagine that it's like 3,000 or 3,500 of calories easily on a day.
What weight are you at the moment?
I'm about 90 kilos, something like that.
90 kilos. So that's
probably 200 pounds.
200 pounds. So you're, and when you look at the average person, let's say you take a 200-pound person. The average person will say, okay, you need to multiply that by 10. You need to multiply that by 11. And you need to drop that down. You need to drop that down by 500 calories. I would love someone to explain that to me, how our body is run that way.
Yeah, I didn't even do that on a mixed diet.
Yeah.
It was higher.
Absolutely, because I'm the very, very same as you. I weigh 130 pounds. And I should be my maintenance calories should be around 1,900 calories. Now, if I want to lose weight, I need to be in a calorie deficit of 500 calories. So that means I have to be 1,300. I'm like you. I'm taking in over 300 grams of fat a day. A day. I think I'm on around 320 grams of fat a day, and my protein is around 130. So I'm having roughly around 4,000 calories a day. How is that possible if I only weigh 130?
Yeah, you're eating more than me in terms of calories. And a nice way to look at it as well, and that's interesting for diabetics, this concept of measuring your insulin sensitivity. Yeah, they typically do it with
Absolutely.
carbohydrates.
100%.
And
100%.
yeah, and what I do actually, and although you cannot find it in research papers or anything, but yeah, this whole concept of insulin resistance or sensitivity, of course, is just a construct. But the construct I like to look at is actually the number of insulins that I have to take per calorie. So this is the only occasion that I use calories because it's convenient. But if I eat one meal, it's one meal a day that I'm eating now, it's 3,500 calories, and I inject a total of 4 or 5 units of insulin. And that is the amount that some people would almost inject for a simple snack.
Yeah.
So my insulin resistance, well, according to those research papers that you find about keto diet, they say like it introduces insulin resistance. My insulin resistance, if you would measure it the standard way, would be very high as well, because if I suddenly start to eat carbohydrates, I actually did it yesterday. I drank half a liter of goat kefir. I had to inject 2 units of insulin because I'm not used to it anymore.
Wow.
But yeah, that's, I don't know, is that 200 calories? I have no idea, but that's nothing. So my insulin sensitivity actually increased by a lot, because my total intake is now 5 plus 15, or I usually end up at 20 or maybe 25 units per day. And on my previous diet, which already was quite okay in terms of, it was not high carb, but I usually used 30 to 35 units. And I think actually the only way that you can look at insulin sensitivity, and that can only be done by type 1 diabetics, is by looking at what happens if you're not eating and you inject 1 unit of insulin. How well do you respond to that? And I still respond the same. If I inject 1 unit, if I'm high at the 7 or 8, I inject 1 unit and I go down to a 4 or a 5. And that's what happened in the past as well. So yeah, it's just an anecdote, but I think one anecdote is already enough to show that that it doesn't have to be true that you get insulin resistance on a keto diet. It's the opposite. If
Yeah,
any.
it is. Yeah, because all you're doing pretty much is you're just removing all the inflammation, because that's where all the damage is coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, and then Bart K explains as well on the internet. It's this insulin resistance is just a physiological. Well, it's not even a response of your body, because it's again a construct, but it's just a physiological phenomenon. If you look at it in that way, it's just what comes out of it. And yeah, okay, you can use it as a tool if it's high, your resistance. There might be something wrong, of course, and then you should change your diet. But apart from that, on itself, it's just your body responding in a natural way. I think like with cholesterol. If it's higher, yeah, then there's a reason for it. And it can be a bad reason. This insulin resistance has a bad cause, the high carbs that you're taking. But the LDL, yeah, it can have a bad cause as well. But usually on a keto diet, it's a natural reason again. Just you're trafficking a lot of fat in your bloodstream. And my cholesterol actually my total cholesterol has been close to 1,000 milligrams almost per deciliter. I mean, that has lowered now. I think that was when I was losing a lot of fat. But yeah, it's still probably in the 500, 600 milligrams per deciliter range.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. And then they advise taking statins, I don't know, at what? Probably at 200, 150?
Yeah. Honestly, it's absolutely insane. It really is. So if someone's listening right now who's going through type 1, type 2, what would be the top 3 things? start right.
So I didn't get that, but I imagine you asked what to do.
Yeah, so if someone's listening right now who's really struggling with type 1 or type 2 or even type 3, and they don't know what to do, what would be the starting point? What would be the top 3 things you would recommend someone to get started on right now?
Yeah, I assume that people are already on a medium carb diet, because I think most practitioners, at least if you're a little bit lucky, they would advise not to go crazy on the carbohydrates at least. But yeah, that would still be 150 or 200 grams per day. But say that you're in that position, then the first thing that you got to realize that if your A1C is like quite okay, according to doctors, then you should realize that all type 1 diabetics basically can have non-diabetic glucose values and a non-diabetic A1C. Just the realization of that fact, that should help you a lot to stay curious and investigate. Because me personally, I was not at that point. I didn't realize that it was possible, so I also didn't put much effort in it. I sort of accepted this reality that everything, you can do it as well as possible, but it will never get in the non-diabetic range. Well, that isn't true. And you can be in range like 90% or more quite easily. Have your A1C below 5.5, and you don't need to necessarily go all the way to carnivore. Start medium carb, follow the Dr. Bernstein approach, learn about Dr. Bernstein. I'm really amazed that this book stayed hidden to me for all those years. It was written in the 90s, and I learned about it 3-4 years ago. And I have done research before. I tried to look up research papers, for example, or advice from doctors. And yeah, then maybe a third thing is to not blindly follow ADA recommendations. I'm not saying that you should disregard everything, because maybe they are saying some good stuff as well. I don't know, but there are some recommendations that are surely not recommended, I would say. And follow your own glucose readings. I discovered a nice YouTube channel. It's called Beat Diabetes. It's focused on type 2 diabetics. But this guy, he always comes back to this idea that you have to measure your blood glucose and see what your food is doing. It's a very basic concept, but a lot of diabetics don't have this imprinted in their minds yet. And it should be the focus.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. I think that's absolutely powerful. Yeah. I think people that are in this situation, they need to be getting these glucose monitors, because this is a very, very good way of monitoring things and seeing what's actually doing the highest damage. So
so that's maybe a fourth thing, actually. I think that's an important one. If you are still following standard rules from your doctor, if your doctor told like, oh, inject this much of insulin per day and this much for a meal and eat this much, then you are not yet independent. And right. The thing that they do well in Dutch in the Dutch medical system is that they already try to push you a little bit towards independency, self-regulation of your blood glucose, but not all the way. And you should be, if you are not comfortable yet with changing your insulin dose to optimize your blood glucose, then you're not independent. And whether that's a psychological aspect or just lack of knowledge, it's also not to blame you, but if you realize that you are not independent yet, try to find ways to become more independent. So change your attitude towards hyperglycemia, but especially the hypos, of course, because a lot of people fear that too much sometimes. And try to broaden your knowledge of the critical.
I think the main thing that's going to come out of this conversation today is that people, they need to just do this research on themselves.
Yeah.
We're listening to the same people all the time, and we're not being given the right advice. And the only way you're going to know is by all this research, checking all this stuff on yourself. And that is the only way you're going to know whether it works or not.
Yeah, that's true. And personally, I also looked at even the high carb channels. So there's this approach called Mastering Diabetes. It's from plant-based people, and they advocate high carb diets with a lot of fruit, and they are eating even 200, 300 grams of carbohydrates. And yeah, I also don't agree with this approach. But yeah, you still can learn a little bit about it. The fun fact is that they managed to lower their A1Cs as well. Not all the way like on a carnivore diet, because a lot of times they are still in the high fives or the low sixes. Even the ones that have written this book, the two people that wrote that book. But what I've learned from this is that it's a fact that also Bart Kay mentions a lot. When you combine fats and carbohydrates together, then the situation worsens.
Yeah, that's the Randall cycle.
Yeah, indeed. And if you eliminate all the fats, which is not advisable, but if you do that and you would solely look at the blood glucose management, yeah, also the insulin resistance of those people will reduce, but they are harming themselves in a lot of other ways. And they don't get the optimal results like you get on a low carb diet anyway. But yeah, it's still very insightful to read about this.
Absolutely. Oh, it's amazing listening to people like you, because I can talk about this all day, but I think the best way you're going to learn about this is actually listening to people that are going through it and that are actually coming out the other side. Because I don't think people realize that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people that are suffering with type 1, that are suffering with type 2, and are able to control these situations very, very easily. And this was the reason why I had to get you on this podcast to explain and let people understand that there is another way. So how can people actually reach out to you? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm mostly on YouTube and TikTok. My name is The Dutch Carnivore, and on TikTok I also started a separate channel because I noticed that among diabetics the whole keto word, and especially carnivore, but yeah, actually the keto word is a bit of there's a stigma on it. So I made a separate channel where I have reduced amount of content about the carnivore and focusing more on type 1 diabetes, and that's called T1D Carnivore on TikTok.
Well, you're definitely making a change, and you're definitely a role model now to a lot of people, because I've seen a bit of your stuff on TikTok, and this is what we need now. We need more people like you spreading the good message.
Yeah, it's tough to reach people. Because of this stigma that I mentioned. When they see the word carnivore in your name, they start to think like you're this guy that just follows conspiracy theories and that rejects vaccinations and all these type of things, and that you're just gathering your knowledge from anywhere.
I'm the very, very same. Like that's the reason why I chose not to put carnivore on my.
That's
because
smart idea.
Because of that reason. A lot of people, the minute they hear you're keto or carnivore, it's like, okay, this person's gonna kill someone.
Same story with fitness coach and that sort of things. That can already be tricky because I mean, there is a lot of rubbish on TikTok, but when you follow mainstream media, it's as if there is only rubbish on TikTok, and that's certainly not true. I was actually pleasantly surprised because I started on YouTube, and when I went on TikTok, the idea was just to do some cross-pollination, but I was actually positively surprised in the way that you can interact with people, and that there's a very nice carnivore and as well a type 1 diabetes community.
Yeah,
much more so than on YouTube in a way.
It's amazing. It's amazing that we can actually reach out to each other now, and we can actually talk to each other, because it's great now that we're actually seeing there's a lot more people going down this route. They're actually trying it.
Yeah, the fact that they can gather thousands of stories like this, that's just powerful.
Incredible. When you that's what I'm saying. When you hear like thousands of people that are coming out and saying that I used to suffer with PCOS, I used to suffer with diabetes, I used to suffer with skin problems, I used to suffer with mental health, And you hear all these people coming out and saying this has all been reversed through an animal-based diet. It's just like, well,
Yeah.
hang on a second. There's got to be some research behind this. There's got to be some more backing behind this. This is not a fluke. This is not a diet. This
Yeah,
is
indeed.
basically like shit. This is changing people's lives big time, big time.
What people should realize also is that a lot of these conditions, not all, I mean, type 1 diabetes is a good example. You can't cure it. But a lot of these conditions, in my opinion, and maybe it's wrong to say it, but they basically aren't diseases. They are a natural response again of your body. If you're eating the wrong diet, carbs, yeah, you get PCOS. And if you stop the diet, then it basically gets reversed, not just put in remission.
Exactly. And I think people need to understand that most of these metabolic issues are down to diet. It's that simple. It's not genetic. It didn't just come out of the air. Most of the damage is done by what we're eating today. And we have to dig more deeper into what we're eating. We only need to look at the supermarkets. The big pharma is making an absolute fortune from people getting sick. And unless people open their eyes and see this for themselves, they're always going to be brainwashed.
Yeah, just consider the idea that you go through a supermarket and you don't buy food anymore. That's my situation. I go there for butter, but that's it. And then the rest is toilet paper, maybe some dishwashing soap. But even there, you might even change on that point. But yeah, just imagine. I mean, it's impossible to imagine if you are not.
Yeah. So where can my people go to find you, Peter?
Yeah, so I'm on YouTube and TikTok as the Dutch Carnivore. If you type in Dutch Carnivore, you'll probably find me. And on TikTok, I also started it. How do you call it? Well, on TikTok, I also started the channel more focused on the type 1 diabetes. Mm-hmm. Because I noticed that type 1 diabetics are either a little bit afraid about keto and carnivore, or there's even a stigma on it, because lots of times they meet people that don't know nothing about diabetes, and they tell them like, oh, just eat some cinnamon or follow a keto diet and you'll get rid of your type 1 diabetes. And that's quite insulting, of course. And the downside is that they become a sort of reactive to it. They don't want to hear anything about it anymore.
And what
so that's why I.
And what are the long-term goals? Are you gonna turn this into a coaching, or what are you gonna do?
Well, right now, not so much. I basically started all of this because the carnivore diet and the low-carb diet brought me so much positive. And I see it a little bit as a, let's say, personal development as well. I like making the videos, learning from it. And I also like to meet all the people on YouTube and TikTok. It's really amazing. For example, with type 1 diabetics as well, I'm in contact with people that recently got diagnosed. And for me, that's like going back 16 years in the past. But it's nice to hear about their experiences and to be able to help. And yeah, who knows? I might do something more with it, but I still have a regular job, and mostly in the evening times I make some short videos, that sort of things. And you can find me a lot in comment sections, actually. I like just to engage with other people's in the comment sections. There's just so much even to find over there, just below the videos. And it's amazing.
And I just seen your TikTok videos. Your TikTok videos are very good.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's the channel Dutch Carnivore. I think you've seen most of that. It's also a bit of a fun channel, just to maybe ridicule a little bit the standard diet. So yeah, even if it's just fun for myself already to make those videos.
No, honestly, keep pumping out that good content because people need to hear more of it.
Yeah, and same to you. I like it very much. You're pushing out a lot of videos per day, and what's so unfortunate that it's so difficult. I mean, our videos should reach many more people, and then you get stuck below this 300 prison TikTok. But yeah, there's so much that people should know about what is a healthy diet and what is a healthy lifestyle.
And to be honest with you, TikTok is probably one of the worst social medias that I ever went on, because every time I put a video up, they want to take it down.
Oh yeah, really? Wow.
Yeah, I'd say I get at least maybe 3 or 4 messages a week off TikTok.
Yeah, sometimes. There was one video where I talked about the carnivore diet, and in my opinion, you should start the carnivore diet just to try it, to experience it. And I remember that I mentioned something like a comparison with bungee jumping.
Yeah.
Like, people do much more scary things in life.
Yeah.
So, well, why don't you try a carnivore diet for 30 years and laugh about it afterwards?
Yeah.
And this bungee jumping, of course, made the video to be censored. That sort of stuff. But yeah.
No, it's crazy that you can't put up a video these days and you're going to scare people and kill people. It's just insane. Absolutely insane. And the thing,
do you think you are being censored because of the alternative views on diets, you think? Or is it not that bad?
Oh, yeah. 100%. The amount of hate that I get every week is unreal.
Yeah, and you make a lot of commentary on other people's videos, of course, that might be actually triggering those people to report your videos, right? That might be an issue, I imagine.
And you know what the funny thing is? Every time I do these videos, I always reach out to these people and say, I'm going to be putting your video up today. I'd be more than happy to have this conversation with you on a live chat. All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I always reach out to these people and say, listen, I don't agree with your views. You don't agree with my views. Let's jump on a live chat and let's see what the audience sees.
Yeah, if they are truly believing in their views, then it should be helpful to themselves, right?
Yeah.
But they don't do it.
Yeah. And that's all I want. I'm not here to bash anybody. I'm not here to say to anybody, okay, this program is not good or this diet's not good. I just want people to listen. I want people to hear what I'm doing as well.
Yeah, and what people don't realize is that, just taking myself as an example, but the same story for you. We are people suffering from problems for years and years. We have had all that time to read about things and try things as well. So if I'm telling something about sugar management after 16 years of being a type 1 diabetic, why should you immediately discard all of my sayings about, for example, a low carb or carnivore diet? And you should at the very least be curious about, why is this guy thinking like this after 16 years? And unfortunately, it's not always like this. But
Yeah. Okay, Peter. Well, as I said, thanks very much for coming on. It was great. It was a great talk. I'm gonna have to learn an awful lot. And as I said, keep fighting the fight. Keep fighting the good fight.
Yeah, and thanks to you for the occasion. I enjoyed the talk.
And
thanks.
We'll definitely speak again soon in the next couple of months.
Oh, yeah, I would like that. Yeah.
Definitely. See you later.
Hi, see you.